So, again, good morning, everyone. My name is Jeff Rasmussen. I am an outreach and program manager for the Clean Buildings team. We are excited to have you here today. This is going to be our Clean Buildings Performance Standard informational webinar, mostly going over Tier 2 as it's geared towards multifamily building owners as well as nonprofits. Again, as I mentioned earlier, that we do have several nonprofits out there that may have a Tier 1 building. Just know that today's conversation is really focused on Tier 2, but we will be having a little bit of information on the Tier 1 information as well. We are recording and we'll have this posted on our website. We've got a lot of information coming in, and we know that there will, excuse me, be a lot of questions. We ask that any questions that do come in to use the Q&A function that's down at the bottom of your screen. We've got an amazing team behind the scenes that are there monitoring the Q&A and be able to answer your questions. Okay. When we get to the Q&A portion at the end, if you're more comfortable asking your question live, please feel free to raise your virtual hand and we'll work to bring you in. But before then, definitely please use that Q&A section. So I want to go back, Robert, if we can, to the commerce slide real quick. So and this really just highlights commerce and general and highlights the corners of all four corners of the state that we serve, from economic development to serving communities by providing grants for homelessness and small businesses, building infrastructure. We really touch all parts of the state, and we're here to strengthen communities. Staffing, like I said, we've got an amazing staff behind the scenes that are supporting today's webinar. Our Clean Buildings team is led by Emily Salzberg as our managing director. And then our incentive program led by Josette Gates, along with Derek Derek Cockle, Brittany Wagner, and Sam Pfeiffer. Our data team is KJ and Michael. Our tech team includes Luke, Judy, Donnie, and James. And then our programming, compliance, and education team led by Anna Lynn has myself, Dylan, and Robert. And all of us are here with you today. So you may hear from some of us, but know that a lot of us are behind the scenes helping answer your questions, or afterwards be able to guide in your journey to compliance for the Clean Building Standards. Today's agenda, if we can, Robert. There we go. Like I said before, we've got a pretty full agenda, so we are going to try to get through this as quickly as possible, but make sure that you have the information that you need. So if you do have follow-up questions, again, please use that Q&A section below, or we'll have information on how you can contact us, and we respond pretty quickly. So if we can go to the next slide there. So the building performance standards, buildings have a profound impact on the environment. The building sector is the state's second largest carbon polluter behind transportation. Existing buildings create unique challenges and opportunities as the state works to meet its greenhouse gas limits by 2040 and 2050. We're fortunate that the Washington State Legislature recognizes that it's in its best interest to maximize the full potential of energy efficiency incentive programs codes to keep both energy costs low and our greenhouse gas emission, and meet our greenhouse gas emission reductions goals. If we go to our Clean Building Performance Standard. Okay. So as a result, Sorry. As a result, the Clean Buildings Law was authorized in House Bill 1257 in 2019. This is based off the ASHRAE Standard 100, which covers energy efficiency in existing buildings. Commerce developed amendments to the Standard 100 to conform with the Clean Buildings legislation, and these amendments can be found in WAC 19450. You can also find the integrated document by ASHRAE that incorporates our state's amendments in Standards 100. And we'll have a link for everyone on how to access that or request a copy of the standards within the end of the presentation. This standard, or the requirement applies to Tier 1 and Tier 2 buildings. And you can see the breakdown of Tier 1 buildings being over 50,000 square feet and Tier 2 buildings being between 20 and 50,000 square feet, and multifamily housing buildings over 20,000 square feet. And that's where we're going to focus our conversation today, is the Tier 2. So now this law charged Commerce with rulemaking, notifying building owners, administrating incentives, and supporting mandatory compliance, which you will see us discuss a lot of that throughout the presentation today. The next slide here, this really just takes what we just went over and puts it in a nice timeline starting back in 2019 with House Bill 1257. The Clean Buildings Act, all the way to this year, 2024, where House Bill 1390 created the district energy systems. We went through the rulemaking process, and as of July of this year, updated our performance standards to include the rules from House Bill 1390. So on our next slide, Clean Building Performance Standards opens opportunities for sustainability, an opportunity to balance the demands of the occupants, environmental protection, and lower operational costs in Washington buildings. I think it's important to know that implementing the standard really saves building owners money over time, optimizes the building's efficiency by decreasing energy use and utility costs, and increases indoor environmental quality, improving the quality of health and comfort of the building occupants. So, encourages, and at the end of the day, it encourages funding opportunities to implement the much needed building improvements. Really, by reducing the energy use of buildings, we minimize the adverse effects on the environment and decrease operating costs. So a little bit of the history and some of the why we are where we are today. To kind of go into the meat of it all as far as the standards go, I'm going to turn this over to Dylan, who's going to share information on Tier 2 and the compliance piece of it. So Dylan.
Hey everyone, my name is Dylan. I'll be covering a little bit on Tier 2, and we'll be going over compliance, penalties, and I'll pass it off towards the end for Derek to talk about incentives. But without further ado, let's get going. Next slide. The matter at hand. What is a Tier 2 building? Up here on the screen, you've got the actual definition of a Tier 2 building according to our standard. In essence, Tier 2 buildings are buildings that are greater than 20,000 square feet up to 50,000 square feet, excluding parking garages. This also includes all multifamily buildings that are greater than 20,000 square feet. Next slide, please. Up here, we've got the definition of multifamily residences. They are covered multifamily buildings that are on contiguous property containing sleeping units or more than 5 dwelling units where occupants are primarily permanent in nature. For example, with permanents, this would not include things like hotels. Up here, we've got condominium compliance. Condominiums are not considered multifamily buildings in the same way, specifically because of the ownership. So if condominiums are individually owned units, they're covered only if the common space in the building is greater than 20,000 square feet, if the contiguous commercial space in the building is greater than 20,000 square feet, or if the total of the common space plus association-owned commercial space is above 20,000 square feet. We do have more information about this. We just finished a condominium facts and questions sheet, FAQ, which we can distribute after this meeting if people have additional questions on this. Next slide, please. All right, building notification. Right now, we're currently in the process of identifying tier 2 buildings. For tier 1, we identified over 8,000 buildings, but we don't currently have an estimate of the tier 2 building count. Right now, our data team is working pretty hard to make sure that we meet our deadlines, which for you is we're shooting to have this complete by July 1st of 2025. And at that point, Commerce will send out notifications to tier 2 building owners with notifications of their requirements. As we continue to develop our Clean Buildings portal, we will be working to support new rules and make it more user-friendly. So as you begin getting acquainted with this process, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Next slide, please. All right. This timeline shows a couple of the major events that are upcoming for the tier 2. Looking at it from left to right, off screen on the left is where we're currently at, which is identifying those tier 2 buildings. But by next year in 2025, tier 2 building owners will receive their notifications and the tier 2 incentive program will launch. 2 years following this, in July of 2027, is the first tier 2 reporting deadline. Groups will work to meet this deadline. Oh, we've got the timeline shown below, but Commerce will take those submitted reports, and what we'll kind of be doing after that first deadline is evaluating the benchmarking data and submitting reports to legislation. And in 2029, we will put this report together and bring things to the legislature, which in 2030 could take actions, including adding a performance standard for those tier 2 buildings. That said, these rules may not take effect before the end of the 2031 legislative session, and they have not passed yet, but they may include a performance metric in future compliance cycles. Moving on to next slide, please. Robert, can you pull up each of the, I think there should be 4 timelines showing up. As we already chatted about, that compliance reporting deadline is July 1st, 2027 for tier 2 buildings. And just for some context, here it is compared to the tier 1 deadlines. You'll notice that we have a little bit more of a ramp up period for tier 2 buildings since that compliance period has not started. In fact, you don't have notification letters yet. Next slide, please. All right, getting into the basics, tier 2 requirements. What do you have to do to be in compliance? There are 3 main components of compliance for tier 2 buildings, and that is benchmarking, implementing an energy management plan and operations and maintenance program in accordance with the standard. And while these components are kind of overarching, I'll be going into each of them a little bit later on and highlighting exactly what's required and what they will accomplish for your buildings. Next slide, please. Right. This graphic summarizes some of the differences between tier 1 and tier 2 covered buildings. Key differences we've already covered are the size of the building, the multifamily status. So as we said before, all multifamily residential buildings that are greater than 20,000 square feet fall into Tier 2 compliance. Next, we've got the requirements. So while both have to do benchmarking, energy management plans, and operations and maintenance programs, Tier 1 buildings are expected to meet a performance metric, while Tier 2 does not have to meet a performance metric for energy use. Finally, we've got that compliance date. As we already said, the first compliance date for Tier 2 is in 2027, as opposed to the first one in Tier 1, which is 2026. Next slide, please. All right, we've covered some of the basic things that are required, but who's going to go do this work? A couple of the key roles that will be involved as we're working through compliance are the building owners and qualified energy managers. Building owners are ultimately responsible for compliance. A building owner is the individual or entity possessing title to a building, or in the event of a land lease, the building owner is the entity possessing title to the building on the leased land. For Tier 1, a qualified person would also be required for compliance. But for Tier 2, we have different requirements, and for Tier 2, that is a qualified energy manager. The qualified energy manager is an individual that's designated by the building owner. This can be an internal employee, such as your facilities manager, or it could be a hired consultant. This qualified energy manager does have to meet some specifications for requirements, and as shown below, it's pretty much 2 years of experience in either educational or professional with commercial building operations or building energy management, in addition to completion of that Clean Buildings Tier 2 training program. If you haven't heard of the Clean Buildings Tier 2 training program, don't worry. We are actually in the process of we'll be developing that come next spring. So this will be a free covered by Commerce program to get building operators or facilities managers trained for specific compliance to meet that qualified energy manager qualification. Otherwise, if you don't have someone internally, you can go for a hired consultant to meet this. And these qualified energy managers will be responsible for establishing the energy use intensity targets via benchmarking. They will calculate your building's actual measured energy use intensity. And they will also be responsible for submitting forms as specified in Normative Annex Y, documenting compliance with the standard, as well as those energy management and operations and maintenance programs. Next slide, please. All right, for getting started, we've got a general overview of the steps here. Sometimes it's a little bit intimidating, so these steps kind of just show the first couple of actions that you'll take as you start determining your building's requirements, what you'll need to do, and then who will do it. So the first thing you'll do, as we said, is determine that qualified energy manager. Designate that person with the responsibility and have that qualified energy manager begin with benchmarking, which I will go into a little bit, but that qualified energy manager will start by getting the building's energy use intensity and then determining and setting a target per our standard. You might be thinking, wait, you didn't say that Tier 2 buildings had to meet it. You said that we didn't have to meet a target. Yes, you are right. At this time, Tier 2 buildings don't have to meet a performance metric, but we do have this target in place, which helps building owners understand and compare their current building energy use and help them figure out if their building is performing a little bit better or a little bit worse. And it also can help inspire building owners to examine their buildings and make energy efficiency improvements. Next up here with the EMP and O&M, The qualified energy manager will be the one to develop and implement those energy management plans and the operations and maintenance programs. After implementation, they will then attest the EMP and O&M have been established and submit compliance documents. I'll break the requirements for EMPs and O&Ms down in the next couple in a couple slides, but for now, let's go into the steps. Next slide, please, and who will be available to assist you as you're going through these steps. So if you're in the position right now, you're starting at step one, just trying to get an idea of your buildings by size and what their requirements are. The clean building staff, like myself, are more than willing to help you determine what your requirements are, determine what you need to do to comply with the standard. And then secondly, if your building is exempt, which will cover exemption qualifications as well, you'll want to determine this right away so that you know exactly which compliance steps you have, and if you aren't required, if you're just required to do an exemption form. Third, as you read and learn more about the CBPS, we have a multitude of resources, including web pages, the Smart Building Help Desk, Clean Building Staff Again, or utility accelerator programs. Fourth, identifying resources and support. There are a number of different opportunities for incentives, potential grants, and other things. And a couple resources that may help you as you're looking into these are Fund Hub WA. Fund Hub Washington, if someone is able to put a link to that in the chat, I think it would be very helpful, as well as a couple of things I already mentioned are all resources for finding opportunities for resources and support. Fifth step is building your team. That will be putting your qualified person or qualified energy manager into place. You'll do that. And then once you have your team together, next slide, please. You'll start with your compliance requirements as discussed. As your qualified energy manager is going through this process, just know that there are Commerce staff and other resources available at each step of the way. As you're benchmarking your building, there's utility provider support, Energy Star portfolio manager, and accelerator programs. For step 7, this will be done by your qualified energy manager, developing and implementing those EMPs and O&Ms. As you go about developing those, make sure that they align with the requirements in the standard, and maybe compare. A lot of times you have existing operations plans or existing capital management, and make sure that these align with the requirements set by our standard. Finally, steps 8 and 9, applying for incentives. The incentives team, which a couple are in the chat here, are very willing to help you out as you begin going to submit and figuring out qualifications for incentives. And then finally, that compliance documentation that'll be submitted by your qualified energy manager in the Clean Buildings portal. Next slide, please. All right, I'm going to break down what benchmarking is, as well as energy management plans and operations and maintenance programs. First off, with benchmarking, the first couple of steps are very reasonable. You'll create an account with Energy Star Portfolio Manager. This is a free resource from the EPA, and creating an account can take about as little as 5 minutes, as well as setting up your building. Second, you'll contact your utility provider to begin data access sharing. This can be done in multiple forms, including automatic or bulk upload sharing. And you'll take that combined energy data and use that to create an energy usage intensity target for your building, as well as comparing your actual energy use to the calculated target. Next slide, please.
So many things fighting for right softwares, and the one that I ended up saying says use the same as the system.
Oh, No worries there. All right. Next components of compliance are developing that EMP. And EMP should really identify performance and energy efficiency goals for a building, and it'll bundle those goals in a living report that's available to the building owner, operations staff, and other occupants or tenants of the building. This document will change as time goes on and systems in the buildings change. So it's continuously being used to report on energy efficiency over time, as well as tracking compliance with the CBPS. On the other hand, the operations and maintenance program is a component of the energy management plan that inventories building systems, establishes performance objectives, and tracks inspections and maintenance of these systems, establishing consistency in building operations for staff. Many of your buildings may have these types of programs in place. You may already have some form of operations and maintenance work that you do. So we very much encourage you to use your systems and in many ways think of this as documenting the work that you're already doing, and then making sure as you go do this that you are aligning and making additions or changes that bring you into compliance with the requirements, which the requirements for your O&M are detailed in a little bit more specifics in Section 6 and Normative Annex L of the integrated document. Next slide, please. Okay, Robert, can you just go one forward? All right. So we've looked at the requirements for Tier 2 buildings. We've looked at benchmarking, EMPs, O&Ms, all the things that you have to do. But let's take a step back and look at some of the benefits that these efforts provide to you, the building owners. First benefit is better understanding of building energy use. Through energy use analysis and development of your building's EUI, you can get an idea of how your building is performing in relation to others with similar use types. Next, please. Secondly, we've got facility and systems performance. By establishing inspection and maintenance tasks, you can lead to improved preventive maintenance, better performance, and even extending equipment life. Next, please. This one's pretty straightforward, but reduced energy use saves money. Knowing how your building works and how it uses energy can lead to more efficient operation, in turn reducing energy use and lowering those very high utility bills. Next one, perfect. Reduced performance drift over time. These buildings are complying on very long time cycles, and as you have maintenance staff changing, as you have different occupants, as you have different systems in place in your building, it's really useful to make sure that you have a consistent review of your building's energy use and establishing long-term operations and maintenance protocols that reduce system failures and optimize building operation through the life of the systems. Next slide, please. Next one. Resilient buildings, operations and maintenance, preventative maintenance specifically can help identify potential hazards in the building. And rather than working reactively when systems fail, you can start improving things in advance and catching system failures before they become problems. Finally, last one here, supporting future supporting future regulatory compliance. By implementing your EMPs and O&Ms, you'll get the ball rolling for building owners, especially in the future if there are performance requirements for Tier 2 buildings in the future. Next slide, please. Exemptions and penalties. I'll cover exemptions first here. Next slide, please. But there are a list of exemptions which, if your building qualifies for, you can take steps by submitting documentation showing your building status so that you will not have to do some of these steps, including benchmarking, EMPs, or O&Ms for the building. Some of the criteria for those exemptions include 50% of the conditioned floor area is unoccupied. You have less than 20,000 square feet of conditioned space. More than 50% of the floor area is designated as Factory Group F or High Hazard Group by the Washington State IBC. If a building is an agricultural structure, buildings that are pending demolition, or finally, financial hardship. Down below, we've got this. So exemption application timeframes allow for applications to be submitted no sooner than 2 years prior to compliance and no more than 180 days prior to the compliance date. That means that exemption applications for Tier 2 cannot be submitted yet, but come July 1st of 2025, buildings may begin submitting for exemptions. Next slide, please. All right, finally, penalties. What happens if I don't comply with the building's performance standard? The penalties for Tier 2 buildings are not to exceed 30 cents per square foot. For example, on this slide, if you have a 20,000 square foot building at 30 cents a square foot times 20,000 square feet, your maximum penalties for that building could be up to $6,000. But let's use an example of a larger building. Say if you had a 50,000 square foot building at 30 cents a square foot, what would that be in penalties? At most, you're looking at over $15,000. So it can be quite a bit for larger buildings. That said, there are many avenues a building owner can take. If you're coming close to the July 1st, 2027 deadline, we encourage building owners to reach out to us and start discussing options for compliance. And a little bit smaller, if we don't hear anything from the building owner, they will receive a notice called a notice of violation, opportunity correct, and intent to assess penalties. If you receive this notice, you can do a couple things, including trying to comply, applying for exemptions, applying for conditional compliance, requesting additional time, or simply paying penalties. All right, I think I've covered everything here. I want to pass it off next to Derek to cover incentives for Tier 2 buildings.
Hey, real quick, if you don't mind me jumping in real quick, Derek, just to letting folks know, we're getting a lot of questions in the Q&A, which is fantastic. We got a great tech team that is answering them as quick as possible. So please continue to add those questions to the Q&A. We'll go live with questions here after Derek and Shaw. So again, thank you for those questions. Go ahead, Derek. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, thank you so much, Dylan, for going over just kind of the big picture of Tier 2 compliance. Part of that, we can also do some incentives. So that's we're very excited about that. The incentive, if you could advance the slide, please, Robert. Thank you. So this incentive program incentivizes the completion of the reporting requirements. So coming into compliance with the Clean Building Performance Standard as a Tier 2 building, you are eligible to receive Tier 2 incentive. The program launches July 1st, 2025, and interestingly enough, it ends June 30th of 2030, but your compliance documentation must be submitted by July of 2027. So the incentive program will run through 2030. There is $150 million available for the incentives, and that base incentive starts at 30 cents per gross square foot. Again, this incentive is available for complying with the Tier 2 requirements, and that would be by July of 2027. If you could advance to the next slide, please. We Commerce was recently allowed to provide an enhanced incentive for Tier 2. We're currently in that program design, having conversations, getting feedback about what that may look like. So we are currently looking at enhancement qualifications for overburdened communities and vulnerable populations, multifamily affordable housing would be possibly eligible for this enhanced incentive. High energy users would possibly be eligible for the enhanced incentive, and then trying to look at ways to address anti-displacement for multifamily and small businesses throughout Washington State. Possible directions we're looking at is making sure that we're having a balance with the funds so that the funds aren't, if we have an enhancement, that it's not over enhancing or not being more than the cost of compliance. And then folks also provided us feedback that they want simplicity is important to them as well. So having an equal enhancement amount, but having funds reserved for those communities and those building owners above. Also looking at a commitment to implementing energy efficiency upgrades as well with these enhancement funds. We recognize that the act of compliance itself is going to be it's costly. The incentive may not be able to cover every cost or the total amount that it's of compliance. But where we can, we want to be sure that we can help folks out in there. So we just want to try and have a simple process and try and support folks as they are pursuing compliance with the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. Yeah, thanks so much. Jeff, back to you.
Excellent. Thanks, Derek. Appreciate that. So if we can go to the next slide, Robert, and actually we can go one more. I just want to touch quickly on the support that's out there. Dylan kind of went through on a couple slides on who to contact or who's out there to support. Clean Buildings team that are here today. We are definitely happy to support. Here to support. So you've got us, any emails, or you can see there in the screen, there's the customer support ticket form or an email. Myself, Dylan, and Robert, we're generally the first points of contact when we see those, and then get those with whether it be our technical teams, incentives, data, whoever the case may be, to get those answers for you. So rest assured that when you send something to us, they are being answered by someone live and willing to walk through it with you. We also have our monthly Clean Building Performance Standard office hours. This is the fourth Tuesday of every month from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. So our next one is coming up next Tuesday, and we will of course include the link to that if you don't have it after the presentation when we send everything else out. The Utility Accelerator Program, and as well as the Smart Building Center Help Desk. And I know Rebecca put a link to the help desk in the chat earlier. We'll also send that information out as well. And then Energy Star Portfolio Manager is another great resource for support and trainings. To stay up on all this, we encourage you to subscribe to our weekly Clean Buildings Bulletin. If you go to our website, you can easily see that subscribe section right there. Now, this next slide here really kind of outlines our outreach, education, and our support efforts that we've had. So beyond the building owner notifications and the bulletins and the various presentations, we attend a lot of conferences, a lot of workshops, a lot of meetings, and really hitting that outreach. We partner with local governments, chambers, housing partners, and we want to, of course, partner with more to help get this message out and make sure that our communities are aware and educated on the performance standards and educated well ahead of any compliance deadlines. All of our training videos are hosted on our website, so folks can always go to our website and see the training videos, guidance documents, huge library of resources are all right there. And then, of course, like I said, our team, we're here to help. We love to set up meetings where we can walk through your specific scenario along with you and discuss the specifics of your building directly with you as well. So again, we're here to help, and we encourage everyone to utilize those resources that are available, and would love to come talk with your groups, even more so if that is of value to you. So so I'm going to turn this over to Shaw with Housing and Urban Development, who's got some great resources and news to share in regards to the benchmarking services that they offer. So Shaw, I will turn it over to you now.
Thanks, Jeff. All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Chevalier. I'm, joining from HUD, and I'm going to be talking about our benchmarking initiative program. So we have launched this program probably about a year ago. And this is intended for buildings that have active assistance contracts with HUD, and we're offering benchmarking assistance. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the program and kind of where it came from, and of course, happy to answer questions if we have time. I can go to the next slide. So I won't beat this to death because I know this was kind of talked about at the beginning of the presentation, but we're looking at about 40% of emissions coming from buildings. That's 20 to 30%, depending on what state you're in, and then additional emissions coming from the construction of multifamily buildings. So there's a lot of work being done at various federal agencies. Of course, I'm going to be talking about the building sector and kind of the work that can be done here. But if I was in DOT, I'd be talking about transportation and electric vehicles, or all the programs that they're implementing right now. Next slide. So a couple of the pluses. We're looking at operational savings. This is particularly important for owners and for HUD because if we can increase efficiency, we decrease cost, which is good because, obviously for owners, you're paying less in utilities, perhaps for tenants as well, that can trickle down. But from HUD's perspective, we have utility allowances for a lot of our tenants. And if we are spending fewer dollars per tenant on energy, we can help more tenants with their energy allowance. So this is, a particularly important program that we're implementing right now. And then also we're looking at better health outcomes, particularly in terms of increased ventilation, better ventilation, and indoor air quality. Next slide. So the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, gave several federal agencies, funds to enact certain climate forward agendas. For HUD, HUD received about $1 billion. And for our part, we had the Green and Resilient Retrofit Program. And this map is kind of out of date, but we've since awarded about 225 properties, about $1 billion. And I think seven properties out of the 225 were in Washington. These properties were given these funds to implement significant upgrades and retrofits that are going to increase quality of life for the residents and make significant gains towards net zero. We have these 225 properties, but our entire portfolio is about 23,000. So what about the rest of them? These 225 will be, say, our exemplars, right? The communities that these exist in, those people, those other building owners, those government officials will be able to look at those buildings and say, this can be done with, gap financing, with any kind of funds that are available. and they can green buildings this way, right? But for the rest of them, the way that we can help those properties are to share benchmarking resources. So we are doing that for our assisted properties, but we can also help keep them in the loop in terms of other IRA resources, particularly those from EPA, those from DOE, and those from Treasury. You go to the next slide. Thanks. So as a part of the IRA, the GRRP program, we have about $40 million set aside to benchmark properties with the goal of benchmarking about 40% of our portfolio. This comes out to a little less than 10,000 properties. We are looking at so increasing 10% per year until the year 2027 or 2028. And this is, we're going to give folks these supports for the entire 3 or 4 years of the program. Well, we just finished one fiscal year, so the next 3 years of the program. So if you sign up now, you'll get 2 additional years this year and 2 additional years. You sign up next year, you get that year and an additional year, and so forth. And of course, this is using EPA's Portfolio Manager. That tool has been mentioned in this call earlier, but this is a free tool, of course, and you're able to do a lot of planning, some design planning, and goal orientation in that tool. Can you go to the next slide? So why are we doing this? Again, you're able to compare your property on a standardized basis and understand kind of what's going on at the property. Reports that we've had from owners who are already doing this is that they are able to decide how to spend their dollars a little more efficiently. Particularly, this is important for organizations that manage large portfolios. You're able to see kind of where the holes are and which properties are, using more or are less efficient or performing less efficiently, and make your investments according to that. It's also important for those who are managing affordable housing, because the more money you have left over, the more affordable housing that you can build. We know this is not, it's not cheap to build affordable housing. Some other folks have said that they've caught leaks much earlier than they would have, right? It would have taken a year to catch a leak, and because you're kind of tracking the consumption usage over time, you're catching it in month 1 or month 2. And then others use this system as a way to track the impact of a particular implementation. So, that is replacing your HVAC system, or replacing light bulbs, or replacing old appliances with Energy Star appliances. What impact did that make? You'll be able to see that in real time because you're already tracking the usage. You can see that from month to month. And we're working with a lot of state and local governments that are implementing these benchmarking ordinances or these building performance standards. And they, you're able through EPA Portfolio Manager to share that information with HUD and with local governments as well. And this is, from HUD's perspective, it's helping us because should there be another IRA or, similar amount of funds that come down again, we have a very good understanding of what our portfolio needs, what those 23,000 properties, or, we'll have a good sample of them, 10,000 properties, what's needed across the portfolio. And we can make investments and programs in terms of what, in terms of actual data, right? You can go to the next slide. So talking a little bit about how this works, it's a pretty simple process. I mean, if you want to opt in, assisted properties typically have an 800 number. We call them an 800 number or an IRMS number, property ID, a lot of names for it. There's also contract IDs. You just send a list of those over to mfbenchmarking@hud.gov. I would confirm, track down that property. Okay, the property exists. It's not on fire. It is in good standing with HUD, and then we sort of add your name to a list, and then in about 2 weeks, our benchmarking contractor would reach out to you to start that process. After the initial benchmarking of your property, you'll receive an energy and water usage analysis report that kind of summarizes, the benchmarking of your property, kind of puts what's in Portfolio Manager on paper, makes some additional comparisons, gives you some resources in terms of other IRA funds that might be out there, particularly thinking about state rebate programs and funds that exist out of EPA as well. And then you would receive word from the contractor about a year later to do that again until the funds run out, or if there are additional funds until there aren't any funds anymore. But as of right now, that is through 2027. Next slide. So this is a look at where these ordinances are across the country. Again, I mentioned, we're working with various state and local governments to try to help assisted owners get ahead of these ordinances for those that are new, save money, because, either they sometimes lack the capacity, staff capacity, time to be able to do this, or the funds if they're contracting this out to a third party. So this has been a significant help for property owners who don't have the time or money to get this done or to do it themselves. And then the same is true for building performance standards, which is obviously the subject of today's call. You can go to the next slide. And, the map, if you notice, is looking pretty similar, so that areas that already have benchmarking ordinances are now sort of adopting in waves more building performance standards. And so we're using this as an opportunity, again, to highlight the need for energy usage data for property owners. We're also, doing a lot of work with utility providers across the country to be able to make that information more easily accessible. You go to the next slide. And this is just a look at the progress of the program right now. Washington State is looking at a little under, well, let's call it 8%, which is pretty good progress. And again, we have that goal of 40%. And to reiterate, I think that's my last slide, but the email address that that I manage is mfbenchmarking@hud.gov. This program is available for all assisted properties in HUD's portfolio. So if that covers your property, absolutely be happy to help you get some of this done. Thanks, everybody.
Excellent. Thank you, Shaw. I appreciate that information, and hopefully folks on this call find that useful and be able to take advantage of those services. So folks, I know we scheduled till noon, but I want to give plenty of time for Q&A for everyone. So I know our team is able to stay a few minutes after to get your questions answered. So we've got a couple of questions in the Q&A that are still open that I will definitely get to. But again, if there are questions that you prefer to ask live, you'll just do me a favor and raise that virtual hand. And then, of course, we'll bring you in, ask the question live. Shaw, while we wait, there is a question in the Q&A that I think is in your wheelhouse, and it is asking, what is the definition of HUD-assisted building? Any multifamily building that received funding from HUD in the initial construction?
Yeah, so it's not any construction. If we're thinking about, loans, if it's just a 221 D4 loan, it's not eligible. Those assisted properties will have an active contract. So these are typically Section 202, 811, or Section 8 HAP contracts. This is low-income elderly contracts, low-income disabled contracts, and low-income Section 8 contracts on buildings.
Excellent, thank you. So, and my apologies, my Alexa likes to turn on halfway through. So, perfect. Thank you. Appreciate that. So any questions live? Oh, Okay. All right. So what we'll do from here is gather all the questions that were asked. And again, I want to give a big shout out to our technical team. And Tony, I see your hand up. Definitely, I'll bring you in here in just a second. After today's presentation, we will post the recording and the slide deck on our website, as well as email that out to everyone here, and provide the links and the resources that we shared, including the information that Shaw has shared with us with everyone. So, see, Tony, I saw your hand come down. Did you still have a question? Yeah, go
Can
ahead,
you hear
Tony.
me?
Yeah.
Yeah, good afternoon. I work for the Bellingham Housing Authority, and I saw a question in the chat there go by about the applicability for clean building performance standards for public housing properties, and I appreciate Shaw's presentation related to HUD multifamily properties. Has there been any consideration or discussion about what this looks like with HUD or buildings financed through HUD's PIH program, specifically low-income public housing, and the incentives there, where we operate with operating grant provided by HUD and a capital fund grant provided by HUD. And so just wondering what that looks like and what consideration the state has offered in that regard.
I'll speak a little bit for HUD. I know that PIH, it was initially intended for PIH to get funds to benchmark all their properties as well, but I don't think it was approved in the budget. That was last year's budget. It's included, I think, this year as well. So it is on the horizon to be able to benchmark PIH building as well.
Thank you, Shaw.
Excellent. Thank you, Shaw. And I want to call on our buildings team. See if we can answer that from the clean buildings perspective. I don't know if Luke or Judy, if you're have any insight or on that question.
I missed the question. I apologize. Maybe Luke got it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or you want to rephrase it?
Yeah, Tony, would you mind just repeating it for us real quick?
Sure. Yeah. So I work with the Bellingham Whatcom County Housing Authorities. We operate a number of low-income public housing properties. So buildings owned by the housing authority, so they don't meet that exemption as a federal building, but we are hamstrung, for lack of a better word, with financing limited to congressional appropriations specific to the HUD Public Housing Operating Fund and Capital Fund Grant Program. And so it's kind of that hybrid. It's not federal, but also all the funding comes from the federal government. So I was wondering how that fits into the consideration legislation around this from the state side, hearing that at this point, really, we're just being asked to come up with the benchmarking. And I want to be very clear that we want to champion forward efforts to improve clean building standards and energy efficiency of our buildings, but also recognize the funding constraints that we operate within under the HUD public housing program.
Right.
And so there's competing interests there, or priorities.
Yeah, and certainly you are subject to the Tier 2 compliance, and that includes the benchmarking, the energy management plan, and the O&M program, which will, when you have those, will help you save energy and ultimately save money. So, but I know it's an investment to get those set up. We are working on getting a template for Tier 2 O&M and EMP that is in development and is not available yet, which could help you and anybody else on this call. And the benchmarking, potentially setting up with your utilities could, depending on the size of your utility, they're required to feed that data right into Energy Star Portfolio Manager. So it is going to take some investment to set up, but should be minimal, because you do not have to yet meet the target. So you're not required to install the energy efficiency measures. And then I would say the weatherization program is open to you as well to get some weatherization to do some energy efficiency measures, but maybe that's another conversation.
And hi, this is Donnie Westfall with Department of Commerce as well. Just to add to that, there are exemptions for financial hardship for building owners that are in situations that they're unable to have the budget or to be able to afford to do some of this work. So
Yes.
please, yeah, refer to the standard itself for those exemptions. And then we also have guidance documents on our Clean Buildings website that kind of lay out each of those exemptions individually.
Yes, thank you, Donnie.
All right. Excellent. Donnie, Judy, and Shaw, thank you both, or thank you all three of you for addressing the question. I think it was a great question. So, okay. I know we're a couple minutes after 12. Any other questions? Okay. So again, we will post the recording as well as the slide deck on our website in addition to emailing this out to you. I'll also commit to all the questions that were submitted in our Q&A today and answered by our amazing team. We will get those out to you as well. So any questions in the meantime? Judy, thank you so much for putting the email address in the chat there. So if you do have questions that have come up since the presentation, I encourage you to email us directly to the buildings team. The email address is also on your screen there. And again, we will make sure it gets to the appropriate team, whether that be our tech team, incentives, or compliance. So again, thank you very much, and hope that everyone can join us next Tuesday at our Clean Building Performance office hours, again from 10 to 11 a.m. We'll have some information for you on that. And then just another final reminder that if you work with a group that you feel that could use this information and have us come share with you either in person or virtually, please let me know. We are out in the communities as much as we can and happy to share this information with our groups. So until then, till next time, appreciate everyone joining us today. It was a great discussion and look forward to the continued discussions as we move forward. So have a great day, everyone, and we'll see you next time.